Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Claire Alloway. I'm a part of the marketing team here at Jobvite, and we're going to get started with this GDPR webinar. Thank you so much for joining. We're going to cover the questions to ask and the best practices you need to know about this upcoming regulation. To start off, something that if you've attended any GDPR content, you are well familiar with. This webinar is meant to be an informational presentation, not meant to offer legal advice. So if you have any questions about your specific conditions or any questions where you're a little bit iffy on the answer, make sure to reach out to your legal counsel for that. And the agenda. So to start off, I wanted to let you guys know a question that we definitely get asked with every webinar. You will be getting the recording and you will be getting the slides. So those will be in your inbox tomorrow. So definitely take a look for those for yourself if you want to review them afterwards, and obviously feel free to share them with your colleagues if they weren't able to attend today. So here's the agenda of what we're going to be covering. We're going to go over an overview of the GDPR regulations themselves, and then going through a couple of the different categories that are covered within the regulations. Here are today's speakers. Unfortunately, Kimberly Smathers was not able to join us this morning unexpectedly. So we've got a great lineup nonetheless. Sujay Rao, VP of Product at Jobvite, and then Shanti, I'm going to butcher your last name.
Sambat Kumar, hello.
Thank you. Who is the Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Jobvite. I'll let them say hello before we get started.
Hi there, nice to be here.
Hello everyone, this is Shanti. I'm extremely excited to be here covering the most top of mind topic for everyone right now, which is GDPR. Like Claire said, I would love to start off our conversation or webinar here with a general overview of GDPR. Now, as you all know, GDPR stands for General Data Protection Regulation. This is a EU regulation that is intended to strengthen the protections for EU citizens, particularly when it comes to their personal data and data privacy, right? And who does it impact? Well, organizations that have establishments in EU or does business in EU, they are impacted by GDPR. And so for the recruiting audience here, from a recruiting context, if you are recruiting talent in and from EU, GDPR applies to you. And you're also probably already familiar that if you do not comply with GDPR, there are serious business implications, right? You could risk serious fines, 20 million euro or up to 4% of the global annual revenue. So given that seriousness of this topic, let's dive. Before we go into the best practices, let's understand some of the terminologies that are in GDPR and understand who's who, right? GDPR identifies and governs three key stakeholders, what they call the data controller, the data processor, and data subject. Well, according to the regulation, a data controller is an organization or individual to whom the data is submitted. So from a recruiting standpoint, since your organization is requiring personal data of the applicant or the contact to evaluate and make hiring decisions or even onboard your new hire, by definition, you become the data controller and you are legally responsible to meet the GDPR requirements. Well, the data processor is the entity that accepts instructions from the data controller and processes the data on their behalf. So in this case, that would be your recruitment solution provider, or ATS for that matter, who collects the applicant, contact, or new hire data on your behalf and processes that data. So by that definition, say for our customers who use our recruiting software, Jobvite is the data processor. And then we finally have the data subject, which is defined as a living human being to whom the personal data relates to or identifies. So in this case, that's your applicant, contact, new hire in EU who now has enhanced rights under GDPR. So what are those specific regulations, right? At a high level, we can boil this down to 5 things. The first thing is to get their thumbs up for them to give their personal data to you. So GDPR requires that you obtain unambiguous consent from your applicant or contact or new hire And it also requires that you provide greater transparency to those individuals about the data you're collecting, how it will be used, how long you plan to keep the data in your database, and record that consent. The second requirement is around erasure of information, also known as right to be forgotten. Now, your candidate, applicant, they have the right to say, I don't want to be in your database. Could you please delete my information from your database? And to be in compliance with GDPR, you should be able to meet that request. The next is the data subject's right to access information and rectification, meaning they can request to view the information you have about them, or even request that you edit or correct the information, and you should be in a position to be able to process that request. And the next requirement is around right to objection and right to restriction. Now, the data subject, this is where the data subject asks you that they not be contacted anymore, or they say that they don't want that information to be processed. And so, again, you should be able to be in a position to be able to process that, meet that request. And finally, it all comes down to reporting, right? GDPR requires that you maintain records of all of the processing activities so you can demonstrate compliance if and when an audit is conducted by EU Data Protection Authority. So given this, let's go through each one of these requirements in detail and cover the questions you need to ask, and we'll also share some best practices to follow. So starting with consent, Sujay, I would love to turn it over to you at this point so you can help our audience understand the variety of applicant flow scenarios they need to think about when it comes to staying in compliance with GDPR.
Sure thing, and thanks for the fantastic overview, Shanti. So, hi there, this is Sujay Rao, VP of Product at Jobvite. Let me walk you through all of the requirements and how Jobvite meets those GDPR regulations. We're starting off with consent here. As recruiters, when you think about all of the sources, how you attract talent into your pipeline, what do you think of, right? So it's typically candidates applying through your career site or coming in through different job boards, or perhaps you're doing a mass resume import into the ATS, right? So that's what you think about. But there's actually more to it. So here's where Jobvite is coming in and then giving you some guidance and best practices. Think about job alerts. These are passive candidates that haven't yet, applied for a job, but they're willing to apply in the future when a new job opens up. Or, as a recruiter, you could be manually adding candidates into the system yourself. Perhaps you met someone at your local bar, and then they gave you a resume, and then you want to import that. Or you could have and be nurturing a talent pool, or you could have your employees referring their own connections to your open jobs. So Jobvite has thought through all of these different pathways in which candidates or passive contacts can enter into your system, and we do have capabilities to process all of those. So what's my recommendation? When you go out and then look for a ATS system, these are the questions that you should be thinking about when it comes to seeking consent. First one is, can you collect consent explicitly? And I've seen other ATSs out there that just provide you a simple checkbox on the job listing page or the apply page. Jobvite has actually gone above and beyond that. We provide you a separate consent form selection page. So you definitely think about how you can collect consent. And also you should be thinking about why. Why are you capturing consent from the candidate? What's the purpose of collecting their data, and what is it that you plan to do with that data? The other thing you need to think about is, even though GDPR as a regulation is applying to all of Europe, we've already heard that there are some countries that are coming out with slightly different variants of that regulation. And if that is indeed the case, how do you set up consent forms so that it applies, say slightly differently for France or the Netherlands? Last thing you need to definitely think about consent is, is your ATS provider logging all of those consent actions in an audit report in case you ever need to pull it up? So as I said before, let's take a quick example of how Jobvite allows you to seek consent on the career site. The first image that you see on the left is where, once your candidate clicks on the apply button, they're being taken to a data consent capture page. And that's where they get to self-identify, their country of citizenship or residence. So for example, do you belong to the United Kingdom or any other part of the EU, or maybe for global multinationals that work across countries, you could set up consent forms for all of your countries, or you could also set it up so that you can skip consent for those countries that do not require it. So once you select, you would go through the candidate would now quickly accept or decline the consent verbiage if they're happy with it, and then that's when they finally end up on the application page. That's the image that you see on the right. So that explains how you would capture consent from the candidates from the apply pages. Here's what happens within Jobvite if you are a recruiter and then you manually entered a candidate into the system. So you may not be familiar with this screen, but I'll quickly talk through it. On the left image is where this is our candidate profile, and this is a candidate that you've manually added into the system. And if that is indeed the case, we provide you a quick seek consent link there that allows you to send an email to the candidate asking for consent. Once they get that email, there's a link there that lands them on a certain page where they go through the self-identification process and provide their consent. Our best practice, right, is that you make sure that when you put up your consent notice, you tell the candidate, what you plan to do with their personal data.
All right, that was excellent. Thank you, Sujay. Moving on to our next topic, which is around deleting and retaining data. This is their data subject right around erasure of information and additional rights, right? So one of the most commonly asked questions relates to how long they should retain candidates' personal information and what information they should keep and what information should they delete. So can you show our audience how they could go about doing that in Jobvite and share some best practices around that?
Yes, indeed. So again, when it comes to setting up deletion or retention policies, right? So Jobvite gives you a lot of capabilities here. But here's what you need to be thinking about yourself when you think about data retention, right? So can you retain, or create as many retention policies as necessary for different locations? Again, we've seen that there are many countries that have come up with their own retention timeframes. So it's really you working with your legal counsel to determine how long you want to keep, a certain applicant's data. So we've seen some countries saying 6 months to up to 3 years, where you can keep, data, in your ATS before it gets anonymized or deleted. The other thing that you should also be thinking about is, can this be automatically set up so that you don't have to do anything? You just set it up one time, and then these deletions occur automatically in the future. That's another thing you need to think about. And then, of course, when it comes to deletion and retaining of data, you might want to go in every once in a while to understand, okay, I'm working on this candidate. How long is, have they provided consent for? How long is their data being retained in the system? So you might want to have a quick check on that. Here's, on this screen, you're seeing how Jobvite allows you to set up multiple retention policies. Just like how we now provide you a library of consent forms targeted to a particular country or set of countries, similarly, you can set up a set of retention policies by country. So as an example here, you're seeing that we've set up a retention policy for all French applicants for a period of 24 months, and the Netherlands for another 24 months. As an example, you can also, if you have operations in the U.S., you could probably decide to retain that candidate application forever, because the U.S. yet doesn't have a minimum or a maximum threshold in how long you can keep this data. So you would just retain it forever. One quick thing about the retention policies is Jobvite has provided you what we call a smart token that you can insert, which actually shows the retention time frame in the consent policies automatically. So for example, if the candidate is applying to a French job, on the consent form, they'll see that their data is being held on file for 24 months. So you don't have to go in and then remember these and then have to set it up. You just have to drag and drop this token or placeholder into your consent form, and depending on which where this job vacancy is being hosted, Jobvite automatically shows you the correct retention time frame. So that is how retention policies work. This screen shows you if you have to manually go in and either seek consent from a candidate that's already in the system, or you want to manually go in and then delete someone's data, you would just go to our candidate list pages. We have provided many filters for you. One of them is to be able to filter by data consent status, or be able to filter by the data consent date, or the automatic or the future deletion date. So you should be able to go in and then use any of these filters to either re-seek consent or delete candidate records. Remember that Jobvite provides 2 ways to delete data. One of them is to be able to fully wipe out data or just wipe out a personally identifiable information. It is Jobvite's recommendation that if you were to, as a recruiting organization, you probably just want to delete the PII data so that you get to retain everything else for your reporting and analytics purposes. For example, what was the workflow that happened around this candidate? Which source did they come in for? So you should be able to do that.
All right, that was a good discussion there. Thank you so much, Sujay. Now let's talk about the next requirement, which is around their enhanced rights to access. Under GDPR, like I said, a candidate now has the right to request to view their information or update their profile with the correct information. So how could organizations go about accomplishing that?
Great. So let's talk about, I'm sorry, I think we were talking about, give me 1 second here, I apologize. So we were talking about right to access data. Yes, so this is the right slide. So, within Jobvite, we have provided, a one-click data export capability that just in case your data subject, which is, a candidate coming in and asking for a copy of their data. So as a recruiter or anybody with access to, the candidate profile and with the right roles configured, you can just go in and then click on the export data button to be downloaded a copy of the candidate's data. So it's now up to you to take that data and determine what can be shared with the candidate or what should be held back, and then send a copy of the data to the candidate.
Awesome. All right, then finally, let's bring it all together with reporting, right? How can they prove that they are GDPR compliant? What are some of the things they should look out for, and what are some best practices when it comes to demonstrating compliance under GDPR?
We hope you never get audited with Jobvite. We've provided all of the right capabilities, but you might still want to go in and then periodically look at your GDPR report. So there are some things that you need to consider while selecting an ATS, right? So first is, can the ATS show records of the timestamp of consent? So if you ever have to prove that you did seek consent from a candidate and you processed their data properly, you should be able to substantiate that by pulling up a report. You should also think about your entire talent acquisition funnel, right? So it's not just a candidate applying to a job. They could be a passive contact that probably was just interested in learning more about your company, and then maybe they applied at a certain point in time in the future, and then they went through the application process, and then they got hired and they were onboarded into your company. So you should be able to show consent all the way from them being a passive contact through them turning over into a new hire. Another thing about reporting is also around deletions. Again, if you ever had to prove that a data subject wanted their records deleted or anonymized, you should be able to go into reporting and then prove that a request came in at a certain point in time, and then you went in and then deleted a certain data. So just to kind of close that topic, we have provided compliance reports across all of our product lines. Hire is our ATS system. Engage is our candidate relationship management system. Onboarding is our new hire onboarding system, and you'll see here that each one of these product lines has reporting capabilities around deletion reports or consent reports.
Perfect. Thanks so much, everyone. We do have a couple more minutes. We've got 9 more minutes before the end of the webinar, so we wanted to give you guys a little bit of time to ask any questions. Sujay and Shanti will do their very best to provide our best practices specific to your questions and maybe concerns. So please feel free to chat those in to the chat box in the lower left-hand corner of the Ready Talk panel, and we'll get to as many as we have time for, or as many as you guys have to ask. So we're going to start off here. So Mary has a question. Does Jobvite provide any consent language that we can use? And Shanti, maybe can you take this one?
Yeah, so I want to say the answer is no, because everyone's company's GDPR requirements are unique, and so we recommend that you really contact your legal counsel to seek the GDPR messaging that is applicable to your unique condition within the company.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so the next question, we have a couple of people asking, they have operations outside of the EU, and they're wondering, are these capabilities that we covered today, are they only supportive of GDPR?
Yeah, not at all. I mean, what we offer is a generic data privacy functionality that gives you the flexibility to easily extend this to other countries that have similar data privacy policies. I think Sujay touched on that a little bit in his presentation. So for example, you can easily use the framework that we have built today for GDPR to meet the privacy regulations in South Korea and Singapore, for example.
Awesome. Okay, so we have a common question coming in, Andrea and Susan, and a couple other people. So if we are a US-based company that does not actively recruit in the EU, but you have a candidate apply from there, are you still required to follow GDPR? Sujay, can you take this one?
Yes, let me take this question. Again, don't treat this as legal guidance. The GDPR language is really targeted for businesses that operate in the EU. So if you are a US-only company, but you still get a handful of applications from say the EU, you may actually be okay by not providing any consent. But again, this is not legal guidance. I would highly ask that you go to your own data privacy team and your data protection officer to see what you want to do.
Perfect. Okay, these are some long questions here. Apologies. Okay, so Don has a question. If someone applies for a position, at what point do they need to provide active consent? I assume we have legitimate interest to work with them on that one particular role, so is it needed only if we want to keep them after the job is filled or closed?
Yeah, let me take that. There's risks involved in claiming legitimate interest. Essentially what then is happening is that you are on the hook to prove to everybody that that you had legitimate interest in holding on to someone's data. Again, do not treat this as legal guidance, but check with your own legal counsel. That's why Jobvite has gone with the approach of making this easier for our customers by being able to set up a consent form so that you can, so you don't leave anything, at risk here.
Cool. So we have a question from Lana, sorry. Is it enough to have online consent by ticking the box? Or are there cases when we have to have written consent from a candidate?
There's no reason to take written consent. Online consent is perfectly acceptable by the law. So as long as you've provided a consent notice to the candidate, and then they agree to the consent by either checking a checkbox or clicking on an I accept button, and you being able to show at what time they provided consent, that's all that's required.
Perfect. Okay. So we have another question that's coming in from Rob. So if we contact a candidate through LinkedIn or another job board, what are our requirements re-consent under GDPR?
So that's a question that I unfortunately cannot answer because you're not using Jobvite to get in touch with this candidate. You would have to work with either the job board or LinkedIn to try and understand how you can gain consent in those systems.
Right. So it's only if you were to add that candidate into Jobvite that we would be able to help out.
That's correct.
Makes sense. Okay, let's see. Okay, so from Mike, if we just delete the PII, do we need to have consent forms?
So consent forms do not have any personally identifiable information in it. So there's no harm in that form being stored within the system. Personally identifiable information is really other sensitive information like name, email address, phone number, physical location address, etc.
Got it. Okay. It seems like we've answered the majority of questions here, and I know we're getting close to the half-hour point. We do have a couple of questions asking about the presentation, and so I wanted to let everyone know you are going to be getting a copy of the presentation and the recording so that you can send it, you can review it, obviously, yourself, or you can send it over to any of your colleagues that have any interest in it. And so you'll have that recording so you can send them specifically to a piece that you find interesting or specific slides. Those will be in your inbox within 24 hours. We're based in California here, so that'll be in your inbox tomorrow morning if you share that time zone. Okay, so I don't see any more new questions. If we do have any questions that I have missed, we will make sure to follow up with you with a response, so don't worry about that. I'm going to finish up here, honestly. So thank you very much to Sujay and to Shanti. The presentation was excellent. I think everyone's heard a lot about GDPR, but hopefully everyone on the call heard a little bit of a spin on the content, something a little bit new to take away. And hope everyone has a wonderful day. Bye, everyone.